The last two lessons that we've looked at in the book of John have covered the section of Jesus' signs in the book of John. And throughout this time, as Jesus' power continues to grow with what he is doing throughout all of the different areas of the world that Jesus visited during his ministry, the knowledge of what Jesus is doing is growing. But the knowledge of who Jesus is not growing very well. In fact, there is a lot more resistance growing to Jesus, as well as a lot more believers growing with Jesus. And the resistance is growing in its violence and its vitriol toward Jesus too. And so we are continuing to get closer and closer to the events that lead to the death of Jesus. In chapters 10, 11, and 12, what we want to think about over the next few minutes is the power of Jesus' signs, the power of Jesus' teachings, and the problems of the Jews in the way that they process Jesus' signs and Jesus' teachings. The one sign in particular that we find in these three chapters would be the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and that comes in chapter 11. Beginning in verse 17, it says, "On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. 'Lord,' Martha said to Jesus, 'if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask.' Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' Martha answered, 'I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day.' Jesus said to her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?' 'Yes, Lord,' she told him. 'I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world.' And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. 'The teacher is here,' she said. 'He's asking for you.' When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. 'Where have you laid him?' he asked. 'Come and see, Lord,' they replied. Jesus wept. And the Jews said, 'See how he loved him.' Some of them said, 'Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?' Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. 'Take away the stone,' he said. 'But Lord,' Martha said, sister of the dead man, 'by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days.' Then Jesus said, 'Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?' So they took away the stone. Jesus looked up and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So here's another one of Jesus' powerful signs, miracles that he's done. And here he raises Lazarus from the dead. And one of the things that's interesting as you read this is you see where many of the people standing around said, "Look, Jesus has healed a blind man. Surely he can also raise Lazarus from the dead." So the belief in Jesus was building, and it was building off of his signs. There was an unmistakability about the power of Jesus from his signs. And his signs were telling people that he was the Christ. Some of them did not believe still, but they had such a hard time balancing or trying to figure out, if he's doing these kind of signs, how does he not come from God? If he's doing these kind of signs, who is he besides the Christ? But they still were unwilling to admit that he is the Christ. And so it's interesting that these folks remembered the blind man being healed. The blind man's healing was an unmistakable miracle of God, because the blind man had been blind since birth. His parents knew it. He knew it. Others in the community knew it as well. And yet Jesus caused him to see. And it was unmistakable that Jesus had done this miracle. Lazarus was dead. Lazarus was dead for 4 days. Some of his disciples had been wondering earlier on in the chapter why Jesus was waiting around. If Lazarus is sick, why aren't we going to see him while he's sick? But Jesus waited so that the power of God could be seen, and that there would be no question that Jesus brought the power of God with him. And so they waited until Lazarus was dead, so that Jesus could bring him back to life. This was the first battle in particular that Jesus does with death. So not only is this a powerful sign and a powerful wonder for Lazarus in the moment, but it's also a powerful sign and wonder in foreshadowing that Jesus would have power over death ultimately after his crucifixion, and for us in the future with our own resurrection from the dead. And in chapter 12, we get this discussion that takes place about Jesus' death, and this is one of those teachings that we're going to look at as well. But people are saying, how can Jesus be the Christ? It's said that the Christ is going to stay forever. And here Jesus is talking about how he's going to be put to death. And chapter 12 has that prediction of Jesus' death, but Jesus knows. Even though he's predicting his death through crucifixion, that life will follow that death. And the fact that he was able to raise Lazarus from the dead and go to battle with death there is just another proof and another foreshadowing that when Jesus goes to battle with death ultimately, that he will be able to overcome. And that's what Paul takes solace in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about death, where's your sting? Grave, where's your victory? And so we have victory in Jesus because Jesus exercises power over death. And so the power of Jesus' signs is very evident in Lazarus and the raising of Lazarus from the dead. If we back up into chapter 10, we see one of Jesus' powerful teachings that we want to look at here. It says, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers. Sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down for my own accord. For I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. So Jesus is teaching this powerful teaching about the Good Shepherd and about the gate for the sheep. Jesus is the gate. Jesus is the only way in. And Jesus is going to make that way possible by laying down his life. There's not just one herd of sheep that Jesus is focusing in on. Jesus isn't just going to save the Jews. He's also going to save the Gentiles. He's not just going to save one race. He's going to save all races. He's not going to save just one class. He's going to save all classes. He's not going to save just one nationality. He's going to save all nationalities. And he has the power to do so. He's going to give his life for them. And so Jesus says, those who know the shepherd are those who listen and obey and follow the shepherd. Those who listen and obey and follow the shepherd, they're going to be the ones that have life. And so Jesus is the gate for the sheep. Jesus is also the good shepherd to the sheep. We need that shepherd. We need a shepherd who's going to lead us beside the quiet waters and who's going to lead us in the paths of righteousness, the one who's going to take us to the green pastures, just like the 23rd Psalm talks about. And Jesus, he's not gathering up the sheep for his own purpose, but he's gathering up the sheep to better the sheep. And too many times people want to get a following of others, gather up sheep so that they can have power over the sheep and so that they can stand to gain from the sheep. And so Jesus says, any imposters, they come to steal and kill and destroy. So you might throw the Pharisees in that boat, or you might throw the Sadducees in that boat. You might throw the scribes in that boat. You might throw, the idolatrous in that boat. Whatever you want to, whatever leadership that tries to herd people, if they're not hurting people through Christ, who is the gate, then they're going to end up doing it for the purpose of killing and destroying and stealing from the main purpose that was meant, and that is the purpose of Christ. And so we want to go through the gate. We want to follow the Good Shepherd. In chapter 12, we see an interesting teaching coming on the heels of Jesus predicting his own death. In verse 35, he says, Jesus told them, "You are going to have light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before the darkness overtakes you. The man who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. Put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of light." When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. So Jesus is telling them, I am the light. And John attests to that at the beginning of the book. In him was life, and his life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. Jesus says, I am still the light. I'm still shining for you. Now, are you going to bask in the light while the light's here? Are you going to learn from the light? Are you going to become children of the light? Or are you just going to let the light fizzle out and leave you, and then you wander around in darkness again? What are you going to do with the light? And so many times we can take for granted the blessings that we have, or the luxuries that we have. Those people who were in the presence of Jesus had a great luxury to be able to see him and to know him and to learn from him. But how many of them, do you wonder, took that luxury for granted? Just thought they'd always be able to go over and flip the switch on, flip the switch off, whenever it was convenient for them. Jesus says the light is not going to be here forever in person. So soak it up the best that you can. Later on in chapter 12, Jesus goes on to tell them that the Father has sent me, and you need to believe in me. Because if you don't believe in me, you don't believe in God. And people don't want, in that time, people didn't want to be accused of not believing in God. They were supposed to be children of God. That was their claim, and that's what they were trying to follow through with, was their obedience and belief in God. And Jesus says, look, you're not going to be a believer in God if you're not a believer in me, because the Father has sent me. God and I are one. And you can't separate the two. It's just a very powerful thought that they were really having a hard time with. They kept beating their head against these ideas that Jesus was presenting them. So the power of Jesus' teaching is Jesus is God, and God is Jesus, and you can't have one without the other. Jesus is the light, and rather than walking around in darkness and wondering what is right from wrong, become children of light and allow that childhood, that adoption as son, to enlighten you as to what is true, and stop walking around in darkness. Follow the Good Shepherd, because he leads through the gate, which gives protection in life. And the protection comes from sin, and the life comes in eternity. And that's where our benefits will be reaped. The power of Jesus' signs comes from Lazarus being raised from the dead. So it gets us to our last discussion, and that's a continuation of the problem of the Jews. Every time Jesus does signs, there's always this mixed reaction. Some people believe him, some people don't. Some people are willing to confess that they believe him, some people aren't. And then we get into this now in these chapters where the angst toward Jesus is starting to escalate, and people are talking more and more about plotting to kill Jesus and making harsh accusations that would allow them to successfully follow through with that execution, like blasphemy and things of that nature. And so in chapter 10, the Jews asked Jesus point blank, "Are you the Christ? And if so, why haven't you told us that you're the Christ?" And Jesus' response to them is, "I have already been very plain telling you, but you don't believe. You don't believe that I'm the Christ." And he talks about these signs that I've done over and over and over again speak to the fact that I'm the Christ. I mean, if you're not going to believe based on this, when are you ever going to believe? And from that, these Jews listening to him start picking up stones like they're going to stone him because they believe that he's committed blasphemy, calling himself God. And Jesus goes through and he answers them, beginning in verse 34, "Is it not written in your law, I've said you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, what about the one whom the Father set apart as his very own and sent into the world? Why then do you accuse me of blasphemy because I said I am God's son? Do not believe me unless I do what my Father does. But if I do it, even though you don't believe me, believe the miracles, that you may learn and understand that the Father is in me, and I in the Father." Again, they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. Again, the Jews are having such a hard time because tradition builds up a sense of pride in us where we have to preserve what we have built. Otherwise, what are we? And so the Jews are no longer built on the will of God itself. They're built on their traditional proceedings in pursuing the will of God. And that's not the same thing as pursuing the will of God itself. It's pursuing their way of interpreting the will of God. And so they've built this up for themselves, by themselves, and they're trying to preserve that. Well, the Christ, Jesus being the Christ, would cheapen that or would destroy that and replace that with Christianity. And so they're trying to preserve that, and they can't see a way of keeping what they've built and letting Jesus be the true Christ. So they want to get rid of him. Chapter 11, Caiaphas stands up, and he's the high priest, and he speaks on the need to kill Jesus because he doesn't believe that Jesus has the firepower or the manpower to stand up against Rome. And so if Jesus really is the Christ and he tries to take on Rome, he's going to fail, and then that's going to just bring more backlash to the Jews. And so they need to go ahead and kill him and prevent any misery for themselves. says, beginning verse 49 of chapter 11, one of them named Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. It was almost time for the Jewish Passover, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and they stood in the temple area. They asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all?" The chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so that they might arrest him. They are seriously trying to discredit Jesus. They're also seriously pursuing him to try to put him in prison, and ultimately they want to put him to death. In chapter 12, we see that there are those who do believe in Jesus inwardly, but they're unwilling to announce it to the world because of fear. And so here's another dynamic to the fear of the Jews, or to the problem of the Jews with believing in Jesus. They're afraid of the repercussions from the people of power. And so it says, verse 42 of chapter 12, yet at the same time many even among the leaders believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved praise from men more than praise from God. There's that pride again. The willingness to protect their tradition and to protect what they had built on their own, rather than pouring their effort from what they had built into what God was building for them. To know that God gives good and perfect gifts, and to know that God is going to take care of them above and beyond what they could ever take care of themselves. That trust should have manifested itself in belief in Jesus, but instead they continued to challenge themselves and handicap themselves in their faith by trying to protect their own way. My prayer and my hope is that we see the things of Jesus, and we know his signs, and we understand his wonders, and we allow that to lead to our own belief. What Jesus did was unmistakable, to make sure that we know that he is the anointed one of God. He is Christ. And we need to trust that he is reigning now as Lord because of the events that followed. And we need to follow him and let our belief be known by our obedience, by our faithfulness every day. That's going to make all the difference in our walk with God. And that's going to make all the difference in how we can bring others to God too.